I'm Tim Sasak. And you wanted to know what I was doing? I have a part-time job. I do it pretty much from home by email, computer.
I'm Toby Bishop for the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. Tim Sasak doesn't meet the profile of a con artist, but that is exactly what he is.
I grew up in Gary, Indiana. I went to a Catholic parochial school until the second grade. Then I went to public school through high school.
I can come across very likable and very charming and very warm. I have a good instinct of psychology. I could size up someone pretty quickly, and I can see what their weaknesses are, see what their wants and desires are, find out most anything about a person within a few short questions.
Steve Commissar is also a con artist. In this presentation, both Tim and Steve will help us examine the major methods used to defraud investors and consumers. They include the following schemes: investment, entrepreneurial, debt and money management, computer and high-tech, promotion scams, and classic cons. Deanne Holtzman conducts research at the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners.
Investment frauds usually offer fantastic profits with little risk. They can involve bonds, certificates of deposits, collectibles, futures, notes, offshore trusts, options, real estate, securities, stocks, and even more. Investment swindles, like Tim's, are normally one of four types: bait and switch schemes, pyramid operations, Ponzi schemes, and pump and dump schemes. Bait and switch schemes occur when investors are promised one thing and given another. For example, a dishonest broker might collect a fee by convincing the client the investment is low risk, when in truth it is quite the opposite. Or the investor may originally purchase blue chip stocks only to be pressured by a crooked broker to switch.
Another variation of investment frauds involves pyramid operations, which can be legal or illegal. Pyramids operate on the theory that one person can recruit several others to participate in a money-making scheme. The inherent problem with pyramids is that they quickly run out of people. For example, if one person recruited 6 others, then those 6 others recruited 6 more, and so on. By the 13th layer of the pyramid, nearly 13 billion people would be participating. That's 2.5 times the world's population.
Legal pyramids receive their income from recruiting individuals to sell products or services. For example, Mary Kay Cosmetics and Amway Corporation are legal pyramids because they both sell tangible goods.
An illegal pyramid, on the other hand, derives its income from recruiting other individuals to contribute funds. The most common example of an illegal pyramid is the classic chain letter scam, where you put money in an envelope and send it to several other people. The problem, of course, is that someone always breaks the chain, thereby collapsing the pyramid.
Another characteristic of a pyramid, either legal or illegal, is that the people at the top receive the lion's share of the money. A Ponzi scheme is a special type of pyramid used exclusively for investment swindles. This scam was popularized by Charles Ponzi nearly a century ago and is still widely used. Ponzi was able to collect millions of dollars from poor Italian immigrants in Boston by promising them 360% annual interest on their investments. What Ponzi actually did was to pay back a few initial investors who then became his best advertisers. They would tell others of their success, who would tell still others. Ponzi was able to keep his pyramid from collapsing so long as the money he collected from new investors exceeded the money he was paying out to older ones.
But Ponzi schemes, like other illegal pyramids, are doomed by the cold logic of mathematics to fail. It's just a matter of time, just like with Tim Sasak. Tim, an accountant, had a successful career conducting audits, but his marriage was suffering from the pressure of long hours, so he looked around for another career, one where he could make some real money.
And after I sold my practice, I went into the mortgage banking business. A big part of that was that I just couldn't be a father and a husband and work tax seasons.
Tim's investment swindle began not too long after he started his new business as a mortgage broker.
Well, I had a lot of syndicators for clients, and I was very knowledgeable and specialized in real estate syndication. I had lenders for clients. I was very knowledgeable in lending.
Tim was supposed to make his money by connecting borrowers with lenders and receiving a fee for his services.
My clients and a lot of other people in the world were looking for simple investments that produce cash flow. So it just seemed like the right time to do a mortgage fund.
A mortgage fund is a partnership secured by real estate investments. Individual investors purchase a portion of the fund, then profit from the rental or sale of the property. Finding investors wasn't difficult for Tim because, like other investment swindlers, he promised fantastic profits.
And the demand for this mortgage investment product was really wonderful, and it was far greater than I could supply.
Jim Sell, an accountant and certified fraud examiner, has his own view of Sasak's operation, which was called Avanti Mortgage Company.
In the case of Avanti, it was a fraud from the beginning.
And so I started to borrow money from the partnership to use the seed money to build the business. And I signed, promissory notes, but I really didn't collateralize it properly and stuff like that.
In other words, Tim helped himself to the partnership's money. He knew it was wrong, but Tim convinced himself otherwise.
And it just felt like this would be okay, and it was going to work out, and it was one of those things where the means justify the ends.
Tim, like many other first-time fraud offenders, didn't start off with the idea of stealing. By the same token, he couldn't or wouldn't turn off the money flow.
And so the money's coming in so fast that we fully sell out one partnership.
Real estate investment partnerships, such as Tim's, are required to be registered as securities, a long and involved process. So Tim started cutting corners.
And we've got checks already in before we've got the other partnership, to the regulators or to the underwriter. And then when we get that one ready to go, we just dump those checks into the next one. It's called parking securities. It's illegal.
He would issue those investors quarterly dividend checks. to make them think that they were getting a return on their investment. He would send them letters telling them what assets were held by their partnership, none of which was true.
But that, by far, wasn't Tim's only illegal act. To keep the money from investors coming in, he started a new fund of his own.
And the first one was, well, it became known as the Casper Fund. And my secretary gave it that name.
She became extremely frustrated over having information to be able to answer inquiries by the Casper investors. They referred to it as the partnership that SASAC carried around in his briefcase. They thought it was pretty funny that none of the broker-dealer due diligence people or the auditors or the attorneys ever asked about Casper.
Like a ghost, the Casper Fund didn't really exist. But he sold out that partnership, then started another, and another.
But in any event, that entire partnership became hidden, and it became hidden from underwriters, auditors, investors, the whole thing. And it was just, I did the second partnership and I used the very same name, but in another year. I can describe that the average investment was above $10,000. So you're not supposed to put the widow with her last $10,000 all into one investment, no matter what it is. And they're real commission hounds. And I mean, it's like a whole breed of people that I have not been exposed to previously and seen them in this light.
There's a lot of conflicts of interest that exist in the brokerage industry. One of the things that got SASAC in tight with the broker-dealers that he worked with was that he was offering them an 8% commission, which was, top of the line basically for commissions. And he would refer to it as the greed factor. He's told me on occasions that it's hard to believe how much people are willing to overlook.
But greedy securities dealers depend in part on greedy investors.
And so they'd run out there and they'd push a bunch of greed buttons, and they would get people who were earning 14% FDIC protected and have them pull that money out of there and invest in my investment for 18%.
Promising unusually high returns is one of the biggest clues to investment swindles. But once Tim promised big profits, sooner or later he would have to produce. That took some doing.
And that became more repetitive and much more complex, because we got into all kind of real estate exchanges, lending, some very, very complex transactions. And then, of course, I found out the more complex the transaction was, the less the auditors could understand it. So it kind of became like a mortgage Ponzi.
The key to a Ponzi scheme is to keep increasing the amount of money collected. As long as the supply of new investors exceeds old ones, the pyramid can continue, but not forever.
You rob Peter to pay Paul. In this case, the Ponzi scheme was he makes a bad loan. He covers up the bad loan by having another partnership buy it. Or he ends up loaning the individual more money, making a bigger loan to him so he can pay off the old loan.
Tim, an accountant, knew if he couldn't cover his frauds with legitimate profits, his scheme would eventually be doomed.
If the market had continued the way it was without the real estate crunch, and I had run it for another 2 years, I would have easily had $100 million under management. And then in another year, it would have probably doubled. I mean, I could see that I would have $1 billion under my control in a decade. And if I made 1 or 2% of that, that was fine. And of course, those are the kind of dollars that would cover past sins.
But the softening of the real estate market brought an unwelcome visitor, a lender's representative.
Well, what happened was you had properties that would be sold from one grader fool to another, year after year, decade after decade. And so properties became valued at far more than they were worth, even when an appraiser would look at comparable sales. This one due diligence officer made a trip and looked at some of the properties. And then she went and called all the other broker-dealers and said, hey, you know, these properties are no good.
After that, Tim's fraud started unraveling like a ball of twine. Many of Tim's high-priced real estate partnerships turned out to be little more than dirt.
They all looked better on paper than they were, and many of them were severely flawed.
So if Tim was collecting big money for worthless real estate, what was he doing with the loot?
Well, my salary from Avanti Mortgage was about $400 a year. And then the partnership distributions to me as a general partner were more than that, for a few years anyway. And then I did some transactions where I used partnership funds to buy personal assets.
Well, you know, on the surface, Tim was a family man, fairly conservative. But one of the things that he had was a $70,000 or $80,000 Ferrari that he kept in a storage locker because he didn't want any of the investors to actually know that he had the Ferrari. But he enjoyed riding around in his Ferrari when he was, particularly, I guess, when he was out of town. See, other things he had a ski lodge up in Colorado. And he liked to spend quite a bit of time over in San Diego. And at the time this all started to unravel, he was in the process of trying to buy a condo over in California, over in the San Diego area.
Tim was taking more than $1 million a year from his bogus real estate deals, living high on the hog. When the authorities started closing in, Tim came up with a plan.
Well, basically what Tim Sasak did was he found people approximately his age that had died, and he had applied for passports in their name.
Identity fraud is a serious problem used for a variety of crimes. In Tim's case, he planned to use his fake passport to hide his assets in another name.
So I used that one. I didn't use it extensively, but I used it. And I opened one bank account with it, and I did some business with it. I sold the Ferrari that I had, that my wife got me for my 40th birthday, I think. Sold jewelry, you know, I forget what I was, you know, I was selling Indian jewelry. I had concessions on the Marine Corps bases.
Tim's fake passport scheme worked so well, he decided to get another one. That was a mistake. He was quickly caught and arrested the second time.
Evidently, the FBI regularly checks the death records against passports, and so the FBI ended up arresting him for the passports that he had applied for and obtained in the assumed names.
And I had been indicted for a federal passport crime, and I pled to that. And in my view, then, I mean, it was as serious as any of this. It was a felony. So I went before a federal judge, and I got 3 years probation, a fine, and community service.
After that, Tim's legal problems were just beginning.
I was a really big catch for this local area, and it was a really big deal. And there were thousands of investors involved, you know, thousands of my victims.
There were over 3,000 investors in Avanti, and I use that collectively, and $38.5 million was raised from the public.
And those victims showed up at the courthouse by the hundreds, demanding justice.
And there was 4 defendants, all convicted. I received 2 10-year prison sentences consecutively, the maximum. I pled to 2 counts.
On top of that, Tim now owes over $200 million.
So my criminal restitution was $16,506,000. The civil RICO judgment was $87 million. And that's grown to about $220 million.
A lot of the investors were pretty devastated. I mean, there were investors that ended up eating cat food because they couldn't afford anything else. Investors that died because they couldn't afford to have an operation that they needed. Investors that had to sell their homes because some of the salespeople talked them into taking out mortgages on their houses to invest in Avante.
For the next 9 years and 3 months, paying back Tim's victims would be difficult.
I ended up in Arizona's super maximum security prison, sitting in death row overflow for the first 4 months.
Lawyer Larry Wilk was involved in Tim's case. He says, unlike a lot of white-collar criminals, Tim's sentence was more than a slap on the wrist.
Having been involved in criminal proceedings that go along with these types of cases, and a number of these types of financial fraud cases, it was somewhat amazing to me, the sentence that was handed down.
Tim served out his sentence in several Arizona prisons.
Well, the getting caught doesn't bother me. Well, I can't go back and do anything different. But what I can do today is never be in a position of trust. Never be regulated in any way. Never have an employee. Never have a partner. Never have an investor. I don't give anybody financial advice. I get asked all the time. And I'm the guy that advised myself in the prison for a decade. So I just don't do that.
The typical thing you'll find with most con artists, at least most of the ones I've ever talked to, is the plight of their victims isn't that much of a concern to them. They're preoccupied with their problems. You know, they don't even want to talk about or think about the problems of their victims. They're not material to them.
Well, investors can abide by the greed factor and realize the higher the return, the more risk there is. Unfortunately, most investors who are novices don't understand that concept. They just see a guaranteed return. They can go with safer investments, but they've got to realize the higher the return they get, the more chance there is that there could be a problem. And we refer to them in the financial fraud area as tire kickers.
It's real easy to get caught up in what the people are telling you. I mean, a con man is a confidence man, and they're real good at getting your confidence. They're real good at telling a story. And I guess I'll listen to anybody's story, but then I say, okay, that's nice, but what do the documents say?
Another investment swindle is the pump and dump scheme. Dishonest investors purchase a stock at a low price and then pump up the value by making false and misleading claims about the investment's worth. When the stock rises, the crooked investors dump it for a profit, leaving the victims holding the bag. Pump and dump schemes have been greatly aided by the internet, where faceless crooks can tout worthless stocks and other investments with anonymity.
Steve Commissar has been a con artist for most of his life. His weapon of choice against innocent consumers? The telephone.
So basically what I did was I answered an ad in the newspaper in the telemarketing section, and in this ad they were looking for professional closers on the phone to sell oil wells and oil leases.
Telemarketers also use pump and dump schemes. Often they'll claim to have inside information that will cause the stock to rise quickly.
Same kind of thing as the horse racing. Are you tired of losing your money in the oil wells? We have got 900 oil wells all across Texas, Oklahoma, and New Mexico producing oil right now. If you invest in our company, it's $25,000 per unit. If you invest with our company, you will make $1 million by the end of the year, no matter what, guaranteed. The wells are producing oil right now. There's absolutely no risk. Get out your checkbook. Let's get started.
His victims should have recognized that in legitimate investments, nothing is guaranteed. And even though Steve was a gifted talker, even he is amazed at how easy it was.
And it was amazing how you could talk to someone on the phone who is a wealthy, sophisticated investor, not send them a shred of paperwork, not give them any kind of proof that they could check out, but just convince them that this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and the urgency is to invest now, because if you don't, there's going to be no more opportunity. By 5 p.m. tomorrow, all the units will be gone. I've got to get FedEx out there today to pick up a check. And the people who wanted to make that money, the greedy people, they'd send in their money, and they'd lose it.
The next principal category of con schemes involve those who prey on the entrepreneurial spirit. They are business opportunity scams, vanity frauds, and work-at-home schemes. Business opportunity scams usually claim great profits for little or no work. Usually, that's just a ploy to get the victim to part with money. You've seen the infomercials. Attend a free seminar in your area to learn how to get rich in the real estate investment market. Seminar participants hear glowing testimonials about the fortunes to be made. And for a $399 starter kit, you too can make a fortune.
That is the first red flag of all business opportunity scams, requiring you to make an upfront investment in exchange for the chance to make big money. Of course, you know the truth. People who know the secrets to making big money are not likely to let you in on them for a few hundred or even a few $1,000s.
Frauds involving franchises have historically been a fertile field for business opportunity scams. Unscrupulous cons will promise